Okay, we're live on YouTube. We will be starting the meeting shortly. Thanks for joining us in the meantime, really appreciate it. While we're waiting, a reminder to please visit our website. You go to, well, actually, let me show you. Lewisboro.gov.com. All right, I'm having trouble with my cursor, so I won't show you, but you go to lewisboro.gov.com. Under committees and councils, you will find the comprehensive plan steering committee page, and there you can fill out the survey, which is your first chance to give input into the comprehensive planning process. And we need as many respondents as possible.
Mark just sent an email 3 minutes ago saying that he would also try to make it, but he's stuck at work.
Okay, thanks, Jane. So we are just waiting for Charlene to join then. Can I call the committee? Can I call the meeting to order with only 2 committee members present? Point of order. Is that something I can do?
You need a quorum.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me call Charlene.
Okay, thank you so much.
So Judd, I have a question about that. I think you could call the meeting to order. Well, no, it's a question. Can you call the meeting to order, but just not enact any business of the meeting?
But in the absence of a quorum,
It's not a meeting.
it's
Okay,
not a
gotcha.
meeting. Yeah.
Yeah, but you could, if the point today was to hear from you folks in, kind of an informational exchange, I mean, that could still happen and you can characterize it any way you want, but it's still maybe a useful thing for the purposes of moving people along, right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm speaking for Chad, but what I think he just clarified to me is we can talk, but it's not a meeting.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I don't want to waste any more time. So I will,
Why don't you, just invite Annette and I to give our,
perfect, thank you.
okay.
I invite Jan and Judd to give a presentation. We've asked them to join us today to give an overview of the planning board, how it works, and how that ties in with our comprehensive planning process. And I'll let you two introduce yourselves and take it from here. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm muted. Sorry. So I'm the chair of the planning board, and I really am so lucky, basically, to be able to work with Judd Siebert as our counsel. He's been giving us a lot of guidance. What I thought we would, I mean, throughout the past couple of years while I've been part of the board, and even before that, from time to time when I asked him questions from the CAC. But what we thought we'd do is start off with sort of the, where does the planning board get its authority to do anything? And what are the various roles of the town board, planning board, maybe the building inspector, the ZBA even, because they're all really integrated. And so I'm going to let Judd do all the, actually, things that are hard to clarify and important. And then I can talk some about how.
You're muted, Jan.
Thank you. I don't know where that went, but I was holding down the space bar and obviously my space bar broke. So anyway, I don't know where I started, but I think Judd was going to start off with the hard work of explaining where the planning board gets its authority. And then I'll try to talk a little bit about how in real life, the planning board is where we're successful and where we're less successful. So with that, again, I'm just so grateful that Judd is part of our team. So I'm going to turn this over to him now.
And I'm glad my screen's dark, so I'm blushing. You can't. Thanks. And no, it is a pleasure to work with Jan as chair. She's terrific, and our planning board. It's not always. It's sometimes a thankless job, but we really have a terrific team. And that also goes to our professional team at Kellard Sessions, who are invaluable. As Jan said, we thought trying to put the planning board in context, it might make sense just to kind of walk through and explain who all of the boards and all of the players are in this kind of overall scheme of zoning formulation and implementation and enforcement. So I hope this isn't too expansive. I'll try to move through it kind of quickly, but we identified, and I think aptly so, you really have, in Lewisboro, you have four kind of key players. You have the town board, you have the planning board, you have the building inspector, and you have the ZBA. And I just want to walk through quickly what the role of each is. So you start with the town board. The town board is obviously the governing body of the town. It's the legislative body. It makes the laws, as any legislative body does. It implements zoning regulations under certain enabling legislation in New York State law, in the New York State town law, which dictates and kind of provides the parameters as to what zoning, how zoning powers are to be exercised, how they're to be implemented. In fact, the process that you are undergoing as a steering committee with regard to the comp plan, it really flows from Section 272A of the New York State town law, which directs that towns should and must promulgate comprehensive plans. It lays out what those plans are to entail. It identifies who is responsible for the plan. Ultimately, the comprehensive plan is, in essence, a legislative document. The town board has the authority under New York State town law to delegate a lot of that formulation process to the planning board, but in the big scheme, it's the town board that really creates the, they create the regulations, they create the playbook in terms of the zoning code, in terms of the wetlands code, and in terms of the subdivision regulations. And while a town board can basically retain the ability to implement and oversee permitting and zoning regulation, it has the ability under New York State town law to delegate those functions to other boards. That's primarily where the planning board comes into play. The planning board is a board also created, established by the town board pursuant to New York State enabling legislation. And under the town code, it's charged with permitting in terms of zoning. And I want to kind of break these out. In terms of zoning, the planning board is responsible for the site plan approval. So certain types of uses require that before they can be constructed and before they can go into operation, they have to pass the portal of planning board site plan review. Those uses are ones that the town board has deemed legitimate, and has permitted in terms of the zoning ordinance. But of course, what the zoning ordinance says is, okay, this particular use can be placed in this district or that district, and it may be subject to these specific regulations. But there is then kind of an overall review by the planning board as to how that particular individual use kind of fit in to the particular site on which it's proposed, into the community as a whole. And that site plan process by the planning board involves considerations of really looking at the real practical impacts of a particular use, traffic, screening, appearance, vehicular circulation, noise, construction impacts. And the site plan process is designed so that the planning board can, formulate, a permitting and approval process that really smooths out and tries to address those particular impacts with permitted uses. The planning board also is empowered under the local code to deal with so-called special permit uses. These are particular uses that the town board has deemed appropriate in certain locations, but only subject to a specific list of specified standards. So if a special permit application is submitted to the planning board, it's the planning board's function to make sure that in order to approve a particular use as a special permit, each of those conditions that the town board has articulated in the zoning ordinance as necessary for the use to go forward can in fact be satisfied. And the special permit, planning board special permit process and the site plan process are really blended together. If you need a special permit, you also need a site plan. So oftentimes when those types of uses are presented to the planning board, we're doing both. We're making sure that the special permit conditions can be observed once a business or a use is in operation. And also with regard to the site plan authority, that we work to ensure that the plan itself, the layout, the design, some of the operational characteristics, say of a commercial business, are all designed to make sure that you end up with something that will blend, into its environs.
So I'm just going to give two examples of special permits that also have site plans. So an old one that we've been doing a lot are cell towers. Obviously that has a whole set of conditions. And I think another is the recent legislation allowing a winery. So it is, we had to have both fit the conditions of the recent code that gives special permit use to a winery, to the winery, but also had to have a site plan for the environment to make sure there was parking and seating and all that. So I just wanted to give a couple examples to make this combination of site plan and special permit sort of make more sense.
Right.
Okay, sorry, John.
Yeah, and the other overlay that, the planning board, the three boards that I'm going to speak about, town board, planning board, zoning board of appeals, whenever they're involved in decision making that has, environmental impacts, there's also the overarching review under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, which has its own separate set of standards in terms of identifying potential environmental impacts, determining whether they're significant enough to warrant the preparation of an environmental impact statement, which then entails a much more involved review process with a draft environmental impact statement, a final environmental impact statement, and the issuance of a finding statement before a project can be approved. I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but all three boards have to contend and be observant of SEQR requirements whenever they're in this approval mode. The planning board oftentimes will have something presented to it that involves multiple approval agencies. Maybe the ZBA is involved. The planning board's involved. You may have outside agencies such as New York City DEP, DEC, state DOT. And in those instances, we need to coordinate and determine which of the agencies, the approving agencies, is going to be the so-called lead agency that is responsible for the SEQR review. More often than not, with projects that the planning board's been involved in, when that question has arisen, the planning board has taken that responsibility on for itself. It makes sense because the planning board's approval, I think the venue of approval in terms of the what's in front of the planning board, it's a little more holistic in terms of the overall project. There's public hearing requirements, and the approvals that the planning board issues are really kind of linchpin approvals for a project to proceed. So again, not to detour too much, but that's also part and parcel of what the planning board faces. So zoning, we have site plan, we have special permit. We also have subdivision approval authority under the subdivision regulations in the town code. Subdivision, self-explanatory. Division of existing parcels into lots. For residential, for commercial purposes. There are different ways in which subdivision approval is pursued. There's the traditional subdivision process, taking one lot, carving it into two. There are more expansive projects where there are, let's say, residential projects where you're going to have a larger number of parcels and on a large parcel of land, and that then entails the question of whether to cluster, exercise cluster subdivision authority, where you, with approval from the town board to proceed on that path with a particular project, the planning board can look at creating large areas of open space and not being bound by the kind of the rigid dimensional standards that might otherwise apply in the creation of lots. So that is something the planning board deals with. We have not. One other thing with subdivision that we often contend with are simple lot line changes. Property owners looking to readjust lot lines for transactional purposes. That triggers kind of a truncated subdivision review. We see that pretty routinely. In terms of overall subdivision, I think we see some of the smaller, 2 or 3 lot subdivisions. We see lot line changes. We have had very few what I call sort of significant residential subdivision applications. In front of us, we have one right now that has reached the preliminary stage, and we're waiting for a final application to be submitted. But that activity has, I would say, in the last 5 years, has been somewhat muted. So that's subdivision, and then the wetlands code gives the planning board the authority to approve activity involving any type of disturbance to town-regulated wetlands and the town-regulated wetland buffer. And that is almost, right now, Jan can correct me if I'm right, that's kind of our bread and butter, because of the the standards imposed under the wetland code and the fact that so much of Lewisboro is, is is either situated in and around wetlands. So that's kind of the planning board's slice of this type of activity.
So let me just say, and I'll echo that we do a lot of wetlands, but I think a lot of it is because the land that was easily built or subdivided on uplands is, a lot of it is gone. There's not much left. And so part of the reason we see so much on wetlands is because that's the part that hasn't been built yet or expanded onto yet. So if that's all that's left, people are going to try to figure out a way to do what they want on that property. So I would say that the wetland code is very important to us because it's protecting a lot of area that wouldn't be the first choice for any builder to build on, and but that's what's left. And so it is really helpful to have a wetland code that does help us protect some of the assets that we have remaining.
Right. So, and the wetland code is, look, the comprehensive plan is principally a zoning. It's principally a zoning document. So the wetland code is not going to tie into that necessarily explicitly, but the comprehensive plan is obviously going to look at, the prospect of future development, existing development, the prospect of future development, and certainly is going to look at issues that pertain to, environmental protection and environmental constraints. And I think in that wetland capacity, the planning board is really kind of on the point, or really on the leading edge of, of making sure that activity that occurs in those areas, is done in a code compliant way, and also in an environmentally sensitive way. So that's the planning board. One of the players in this zoning implementation scheme that is often overlooked is the building inspector. But I don't want to lose sight of the building inspector and the building department's role, because the building inspector is really, first of all, the building inspector is the chief enforcement officer for zoning compliance. So there is an administrative element to the building inspector's position, and also a critical enforcement piece. But in terms of the administration piece, the building inspector is critical, because the building inspector is really sort of the gatekeeper in terms of an application or a proposed development's path. Because, technically, I come to Lewisboro and I want to, acquire and develop a piece of property, or acquire a parcel with an existing use, and I want to modify it. Step one is really to go to the building department, and for the building department to provide guidance as to, one, is what is being proposed, is it zoning compliant? If not, why not? And that's a critical question, because the why not can often be non-compliance with zoning standards that the Zoning Board of Appeals, I'll get to that board in a minute, has the ability to provide some relief. So, all questions in the first instance of what the code says and how it's to be interpreted and how it's to be applied, that falls on the building inspector. Oftentimes with the planning board, we routinely refer matters to the building inspector, because the planning board does not have the authority to render an interpretation of the code. That's a function that is that lies with the building inspector. And if the building inspector issues an interpretation of the code that a property owner is dissatisfied with, that determination can then be appealed to the last board I'll discuss, and that's the Zoning Board of Appeals. And the Zoning Board of Appeals, the of appeals piece is telling, because that's their function. They're an appellate board, and they can do several things. First, they hear appeals from determinations, interpretations, requirements imposed by the building inspector, again, as the sort of the frontline official charged with implementing and enforcing the code. So if there's a provision of the code that is open to interpretation, building inspector interprets it one way, property owner disagrees, that can be appealed to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which can then it can either sustain the building inspector's interpretation or render its own interpretation of the code. The two other functions of the zoning board that are critical in that regard are its the authority that it has to issue variances. Zoning boards of appeal, they're often referred to as sort of a relief valve, because there's a recognition that no zoning ordinance, no zoning ordinance is capable of being kind of appropriately applied in all instances. There are always going to be circumstances where strict adherence to zoning regulations and requirements may strip a property owner of an appropriate use of his or her property. So the two types of variances are area variances. Area variances being relief from dimensional standards imposed under the zoning code. So I want to construct an addition to my house, and it's going to encroach upon a side yard setback. And instead of having the structure within 25 feet of a side yard setback, or 25 feet of a side yard boundary, it's going to be 15 feet. I, as a property owner, if I'm denied a building permit by the building inspector because of that dimensional violation, I can apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals for an area variance. And those types of variances, the Zoning Board of Appeals is going to analyze under a test enunciated in New York State town law. It's a test that requires the zoning board to balance the benefit being sought by the property owner against the detriment to the neighboring properties and the community at large, and to look at 5 specific factors as to whether, in performing that balancing standard, how substantial is the increase? Is the increase self-created? Will it create an adverse environmental effect? Will it create, what will its impact be on surrounding properties? Is there another method that's feasible for the property owner to pursue? It is, it's not a gimme. It is a somewhat exacting standard, but I can say that area variances are not insurmountable. And oftentimes, when a board looks at a particular circumstance that's presented, again, some sort of issue that's created by virtue of strict application of the code, it can render a determination performing that balancing test that an area variance is appropriate. I think oftentimes, just in terms of applications that the planning board sees that needs that type of relief, the Lewisboro Zoning Board of Appeals is generally pretty receptive. I won't say that absolutely, but you know, that they're fairly receptive to those types of applications. The second type of variance is a use variance, and that's a much different story than an area variance, because a use variance is one that seeks permission to establish a use not permitted under the code in a particular location. And there, the controlling standard is, it's a very, very high bar. It really requires a property owner to present in really kind of raw economic terms, so-called dollars and cents proof, that, you know, if denied the opportunity to pursue a particular use on its property, it's going to be denied a reasonable return on his or her property. Very rarely granted, and a very high bar, but it is relief that the ZBA can grant. The other kind of piece that the ZBA can be involved in is there are instances where, rather than designating the planning board as an approving board for a special permit, the town code gives that authority to the ZBA. And when that occurs, the ZBA has to do as the same task that I mentioned for the planning board, and that is to examine a project and to make sure that it will satisfy the pre-established conditions in the code necessary to establish a special permit. I can also say when that happens and you have ZBA doing its special permit review, planning board also is doing a concurrent site plan review. So oftentimes those reviews kind of run in parallel. Those types of reviews raise the secret issue in terms of who's going to be lead agency. It's typically, my experience in Lewisboro has been, it's been the planning board. And I don't know, Jan, I can't think of an instance where those review processes have not dovetailed. In other words, where there's been some disagreement or conflict between the two boards. But it's a situation that can present itself. So that's kind of it in a, just in terms of a broad overview. Bottom line for the planning board is, we do perform an important zoning function, but at the end of the day, the authority that we have is a delegated authority. If a use is presented to us or an application is presented to us, either special permit or site plan, and it's a permitted use, I mean, we're not in the position to reject most of what we see, because the broad contours of legitimacy and approval have been set by the zoning code. But we are there to make sure that the project, when implemented and when designed and when implemented, alleviates this range of impacts, so that it is harmonious with its with surrounding properties, that it blends in with the community, that it doesn't create a host of detrimental impacts.
So I think that's sort of a great lead in to where I was going to go next, which is really to talk about sort of how this now functions. We've got this framework under which we should operate. So what really does happen? And I would say that, we probably should figure out a way to do this, have a sort of discussion more often, because the town board sets a lot of the rules, the codes, but it's the planning board who sees really how all this stuff gets implemented. We probably see more of what goes on in terms of projects in the community and in a different way than the town board. And the code is really the guideline. We can't say, well, it's something in the master plan. The code is really the all-important piece that we stick with. And I'm going to try to go through that a little bit more here. A couple chairmen ago of the planning board, I was sort of surprised at how things were going through, and I sat down with that chair. And he said to me, the planning board is a permitting agency. We're not a denial agency. It's the thing is to permit it in the most code compliant and best way that you can. So you have the seeker code to try to help. You have things, but it's actually very, very rare that something gets denied. Occasionally you do get a denial. I would say occasionally you get withdrawals where somebody will just not come back. And then sometimes we have things that go quiet for a long time. They're not officially withdrawn, but we just don't see them for a while. But for the most part, people will figure out how to get things to comply with the code enough to get it permitted. So most of that happens.
Yeah, and Jan, and can I just not to interrupt, but I would say in terms of denials, to the extent the planning board issues denials, it is really in the wetland,
Yes.
The wetland department, because you can have instances, because the wetland code sets out parameters and specifications in terms of what must be done. And for example, our code requires if you're going to engage in wetland activity that there has to be a mitigation, and we really look for one-to-one mitigation. And oftentimes, well, I won't say oftentimes, but when we've had denial situations, it's because something like the required mitigation simply can't be accommodated. So in the wetland we denied, but on zoning, as Jan said, it is a permitting board, because the code is ultimately, the master guide.
So that's part of why I said we are so dependent on our consultants. So College Session, we have Jan Johannesson, and we have Joe Tremelli, and who's the engineer, and Judd. And we are, as a board, we are really reliant upon their keeping us aware of legalities of other jurisdictions that might have some say, and so forth. And that's why it's really helpful to have Charlene on, because she has a lot of experience too. So the more experienced people can come in with really more awareness of where we can go wrong. So, and there are other codes that apply. We talk about Lewisboro a lot, but there are county and state and DEP, DEC, so forth, Army Corps of Engineer. Every once in a while, all this comes in. But for most of the stuff that we're talking about here, it's really the town code that's really, really important. I wanted to emphasize that you can set up zoning for one purpose, but that doesn't mean you're going to get that kind of application. So we have to deal with what the applicants bring in. If somebody brings in an application and you really would like to see something done, but there's nothing in the code about it, you have really limited capability to do that. You can use sort of, well, come back next time and tell us if you could put it in a better place, or if you could do this, but you really don't have a lot of way to get something. And I'll give you a couple examples. Almost every time somebody brings in a shopping center change of some sort, I ask, or somebody else on the board asks, would you consider putting in electric car charging station for the future? Or if you won't put in a station, would you run conduit under, so at least it's ready if you ever want to go? There is nothing in the code that says that. And we've had people say, nope, don't want to do it. And you kind of, well, it would be wise. You wouldn't have to tear up the, well, nope, don't want to do it. Similarly with, recycling and garbage cans, well, everybody puts, all the garbage goes into, even if it's a recycling can, not going to work. I don't want to do it. Okay. So there are things that are not in the code, and we can't, I mean, these are little things, but there are also big things so that we can't get in. Some people might say, well, okay, if I do this, maybe you'll give me a little extra on that, you know, so there's a little discussion about if I plant more trees, maybe you'll be a little more lenient on the charging station. I'll plant trees, I won't put in the charging station. Okay, you know, so there's this discussion, but without the code, the ability to really demand stuff is gone. It's just, you know, how good a relationship you have with somebody. The other thing I wanted to say is that if something complies with the code, if you have public input that either says, I really want to do this, and something doesn't comply with the code, you can't get around it. And if the public is coming in saying, I really want to stop this, but you've got something that complies with the code, we can listen to the issues. We can certainly hear new, let's say environmental aspects we might not have thought of or something. But if something is code compliant, somebody can hate it, but you can't do anything about it. And the other thing here is the limit. So as you all probably know, I'm pretty involved in a lot of water issues. So I know a lot about New York State DEC 303D listings of impaired water bodies. And that code from the DEC says, if they declare a water body impaired, there's supposed to be limits on what kind of development can go forward until you've come up with a remedial plan. Well, we do have impaired water bodies declared in our town, and yet I have, on the days on the CAC and on the planning board, have never yet once seen us be able to do anything because, oh, this is on the New York State 303D impaired water bodies list, and there should be restrictions. And I would say the same thing in the early 2000s or maybe late 90s, the CAC at that time put together an open space index. So they defined a lot of the open space, a lot of areas that had stone walls and vistas and old growth forest and, well, medium growth forest for us, but, you know, older growth forest. And that that defined things that were really valuable natural resources, but it wasn't enabled by the code. So a lot of those areas have been basically came up for site development, subdivisions, and there's not much you can do with an open space index if you don't have enabling code to say, this is on the index, you know, maybe we should consider it for something. So I say all that because the message I think we're going to end up leaving you, the most important message is getting a vision for the town and embodying it in the comprehensive plan is important. But unless it gets translated into code, town code, the work is going to have limited influence on the future of the town. Okay, so with that, what I thought I'd talk about is some other areas for improvements in the town law. So as a planning board, anytime the town is changing a zoning code, it gets referred to the planning board, and the planning board gets to comment on it. But typically, the planning board and the people on the planning board don't really suggest new laws to the town board. And yet we do see a lot of the things that are difficult. So this is particularly difficult, I'll say, for me, because before I got onto the planning board, I used to go talk to the town board a lot at the public comment meetings and say, hey, you ought to look at this, you ought to do that. Now I really can't do that, because if something comes in front of us, either a new law or an application that might have something to do with it, I would be seen as having an opinion. So I would love to find a better way for us to take all of the approvals that we do in a given, I don't know, year or 2 years, and sort of say, what did we learn from this? What's missing? And get it to the town board. There's not really a vehicle for that. So I'm hoping I can sort of express some of the issues I see to the comprehensive plan team who can sort of use that input. So I wanted to talk about, I said before, we deal with the applications as they come in. So when there wasn't a grocery store across the river, I was asked a number of times, what could I do? What could the planning board do to get a grocery store in there, to get a Trader Joe's in there, to get a, anything in there? What could we do? And the answer is you can't do anything. You have to wait for the applicant to come to you and then approve or deny it. And it's mostly try to manage it to ways so that you can approve it. And I wanted to bring that further. So if the comprehensive plan said, oh, we'd love to have something like a Prospectors Theater, that's over in Richfield, a small theater with lots of little things and food and all that. We'd like to have one of that in town, and you zone for it. It doesn't mean that's going to come. You could get a bowling alley, a climbing wall with hatchet throwing. I mean, you could get uses that are, kind of adjacent, recreational entertainment things, but you wouldn't necessarily get the same thing. So when you think about it, it's really hard to say, I want to zone for one thing. Judd reminded me of this. We just in Golden's Bridge, the town said you can have 1 family, 2 family, or 4 family zoning in a certain area. That doesn't mean that you're going to have a 4-unit rental. You could have a high-end luxury 4-unit condo, or you could only have 1 family applications. You can zone, but you can't determine what's going to come in. All you can do is evaluate the things that come in. Okay, I wanted to say rural protections. People like to say they like the rural environment, the nature of the environment. Rural protections are a lot better in some other towns than they are in Lewisboro. So other towns have a steep slope or rock walls or even a vista protections. They have open fields protections. We do say in Lewisboro, avoid a steep slope if possible. I don't think when somebody crosses the border from, or somebody lives in, on one side of the Pound Ridge border versus the South Salem, Lewisboro side of the border, they suddenly don't care about rock walls. It's just the town has enabled different laws. And so there are different restrictions. One of the things that I think Lewisboro does better than some other towns is they don't like 6 to 8 foot fences right along the roads, and that is a restriction we have. But I think of that when I go in some other towns, and you can see that there's trees behind them, but you're driving through basically a tunnel of 6 to 8 feet fences on either side of the road. So, and why do they have it? Not because people love fences particularly, but because that's what the zoning allows in that town and not in ours. One big place where I think we have a problem, and this might not be the code, it might be some of the administration, but is conservation lands and easements. Cluster subdivisions that Judd mentioned is one example, but often homeowners commit that they won't build on a portion, or they're going to put an easement on a section. And they might get tax relief, but often we lose this. And it is even worse in developments where they might set aside public areas. And yet, quite often, there's no setup for who's going to manage it, control it, make sure there's no encroachment. So Michelle Estates at one point was set up with a whole theory of a path all the way through it, connecting. Well, again, back in maybe 2005 or 2006, some of us tried to find it. And there are fences across, there are walls across there. People have developed all these things because nobody kept the walkways secure. Now, we learned from that when Falcon Ridge came in and said, the first thing you have to do is go make sure you get that path in there before you build the estate. But it's an example where there's things that have been developed that we've really lost the easements. And probably the easement has been recorded and is reduces the taxes of the people paying it, but it might not be open to public use. So one example is what used to be the Popoli subdivision. I'm not going to remember what it is now, but they basically had huge wet areas that couldn't be developed. And they said, we're going to make it open. And that's, oh, great. But then they said, but we don't want any parking near it. We don't want we only want it open to the residents of the development. And this is some beautiful land right next to the Levy, it abuts the Levy Preserve. It's open to only the people, the I don't know, 8 homes or something that are on that development. It wasn't made open to the town.
Yeah, and the Cross River Trail between the school and Michelle Estates, that we were close to losing that easement too. It had kind of disappeared there for 20 years until it was finally rediscovered. Now it's a beautiful trail and people are enjoying it.
Yeah, but I think it was even more extensive. The original design was even more extensive. But yes, that's the kind of thing that's really valuable. It was set up and not used for a long time. So the problem is some of these go to the homeowner association. Well, if the homeowner association isn't interested in managing it or doesn't know, so Indian Hills, I think on 138 has some land that they're not even, I don't know that people are really sure whether it belongs to the town or the homeowners association or who does it belong to. Some of this, is it better to have the town take it over, have a homeowners association, try to give it to a land trust? This would be a great project to figure out who should really do it. But we don't have a great, we have given people the opportunity to give easements and to get open space and protect open space in that way, but it's not enforced. It's not, and it doesn't make the best, what I would consider the best public use of this land. And often they get recreational credit, so they don't, a developer will get recreational credit, but if it isn't of value to the town, is it really worthwhile? So that would be something that it's a nit, but it's a part of the code to show you how important the code is again. Another thing I would say is septic systems are regulated by the health department. The health department cares about human health, and that's important. I mean, we certainly don't want pathogens, but they don't care about phosphorus and nitrogen leaching into the water. So they don't care about things about how far septic systems can be from a stream, a water body, a wetland. They care about, is it going to protect it against human pathogens? I'm not sure what to do about that. There are things that you could say septic systems should be 100 yards from a stream or a lake. The problem is if you have a 1/4 acre lot on the side of a lake, you are not going to be able to get a septic system 100 yards away. And the way our code is written, if you have a lot, if the health department approves, you can put a septic system and a well on it. So it can be pretty wet. It can be very close to water, but if it's a lot. So and that's, there's legal concerns about taking of lots and all that stuff that I won't get into, but that's one of the concerns that I would have. And again, it's not in the code, but one of the things, we do have a code that says septic systems should be pumped at least once every 5 years. So I quite often, if somebody's coming in and they want to do work in the wetland, I look up and see if I can find if there's any record of them having pumped in the last 5 years. And if they haven't, I ask them, have you pumped? And quite often they will say no, but I will before next month's meeting, because that's what you can do. But so, I don't know. Anyway, septic systems are tough. Septic systems and protecting water are tough. Judd brought this up too when we talked before. The definition of a hamlet. Quite often a hamlet is almost by definition an area that has some kind of commercial entity. And yet really, if you tried to put something commercial in downtown Wacabuck, I don't know that that's right. We had a problem with, where does the Golden Bridge hamlet end? Does it end where the end of the commercial section is, or is it a bigger hamlet? What's a hamlet? So the master plan, and even today's thing that talks about a comprehensive plan, I saw the draft of the RFP that says we have 6 hamlets and we have 3 commercial centers. So what makes it a hamlet if it's not one of the 3 commercial centers? What special thing should be in there? So we know stuff is a hamlet, but when something comes in front of the planning board and this is not codified, we really can't deal with, oh, it's a hamlet. Oh, it's not a hamlet. All we have is it's 4-acre residential, 3-acre residential, or not. I'm going to give you a thing that just came up recently, and I saw it on Facebook. So,
Jan,
yes.
yeah, and if I can say, it's really, and that's an extension of even looking at the existing master plan. So when that kind of question comes up as to sort of overall intent and overall, kind of town design or expectation, that's where that issue comes in. What is a hamlet? What's its defining characteristics? If there are 6 hamlets in Lewisboro, what distinguishes one from the other, and what's appropriate? Because what's appropriate in one hamlet, and again, we need to determine kind of what that means. But there's not going to be a one size fits all. I mean, granted, it's a single town, but you have these very unique and distinctive areas that are either going to support or be appropriate for certain uses and others. So that is, I just point that out as in terms of the comp plan. I think that's a very critical point. Is what are they just in the the existential sense? What is a hamlet? What defines it? What's its geographic? How do you define its geographic parameters? And then what makes up these? What are this particular characteristics of those within the town?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, I'm sorry, let me just, it seems to me that the hamlets are almost, you divide the town into neighborhoods and you're going to call them different neighborhoods. Is that a hamlet? So Charlene, I saw you were going to ask, say something, you're muted.
From writing the RFP, it was sort of like that was what was said, and it's a self-defining term, it seems, in Lewisboro. And you're right, they're really just neighborhoods. And how much do we want to divvy up neighborhoods within the town? And that's things that we have to understand. So if we call them, rather than hamlets, I think areas or neighborhoods are much more appropriate. And I agree with that totally, although they identify, from my understanding of speaking with a lot of people, that they identify as hamlets. Now, I would identify Cross River as a hamlet because it does have a shopping center. South Salem, it has some commercial.
Right.
But you
This-
also have some neighborhoods that have very strong identities, like Kitchewan, where, you know, yeah, maybe it's part of Lewisboro Hamlet, but nobody really thinks about Lewisboro Hamlet. So this might just be an area where this might be a convenient vehicle for like some of the outreach stuff that we want to do in the plan, just to think in terms of those neighborhoods, but they don't necessarily have to, you know, evidence themselves in the document, or maybe they do, if you decide that's something important to people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
from a zoning point, so you can have something that's a community, but do you zone by community, or do you, you know, this is where, so what is the purpose? What is the legislative purpose, maybe, is the right way to think about it, of the hamlet? And that,
Right, but the master plan is about legislation, but it's also about, you know, your vision and just recognizing the inputs and just getting consensus about things. So if you know, at least if this is one window into that, and it helps people to organize their thinkings about where they think things want to go,
but I'm
could be
talking,
used.
yeah,
Can we
and I
maybe,
think that's fine, but I'm talking about it from how do we, as the planning board,
Oh, sure. Yeah,
implement?
no, I mean,
I think that, like, in the RFP, because that's going to be the document that we're going to work from with the consultant, we can say that they're self-identified as hamlets instead of calling them hamlets, and then work through it, because the fear is that, you know, we're not talking about, you know, the different hamlets and they consider themselves hamlets, and we'll have a big discussion about it. So if we can sort of change the language, and Jen, that's an excellent point, and Judd, if we can change the language a little bit to self-identified hamlets, so that we're not really calling it a hamlet, and then work from there when we work with everyone.
Yeah, I just,
Yeah.
again, what's done in the comprehensive plan and how people in the town think about it might be one thing, but from a planning board point of view, it's a little tricky. So here's a couple other things that I wanted to talk a little bit about. The town code really does not anticipate and contemplate unusual situations. I want to give an example of Hidden Point Farms pool. Now, this is a pool that was built in, it might still be being built. No, it was built in Lewisboro. It's the third largest in the USA. It's a wave pool. It has 875,000 gallons of water in it, which we calculated has something like 600 trucks had to come and dump water in to fill it. If it leaked, it would cover an acre with about 2.7 inches, 2.7 feet of water. I mean, this is a lot of water. It's heated, so we were concerned about heat escape. We had no way to do anything about that. It turns out that it's really fed by power lines in Wilton, and every time they turn down the wave generators, everybody's power in the neighborhood, you know, it had a surge and it lost. I mean, all their lights dimmed, and so they are now putting in new. The owners of the pool are now paying for new poles and electrical service to be put into all these homes in Wilton. The only reason we saw it was because it crossed about a 10-foot, to construct it, they would have to cross about a 10-foot wide wetland. So there should be, this just tells me that, you know, we try to talk to people about who bring in pools. Please think about putting a pool cover on. It's not in the code. It doesn't say anything to keep the heat in. This thing, we need to have a definition. I think we need to have a definition of a structure, right? That that gets covered under the code that includes things like holes in the ground that are 90 by 40 or whatever this thing was. It's very big. So this is just one example of a situation. So nobody thought that somebody would want a wave pool uncovered, heated in Lewisboro, and yet maybe we should be thinking about unusual situations. We don't really have other sustainability things. So we have talked to people, I have talked to people and said, well, if you turn that house, the roof line, you don't have to put solar on it now, but the roof line would line up so that you could put solar on in the future. I don't want to do it. Okay, it was an idea, but sustainability is not inherent in things that we do. Another example is site coverage. So we have site coverage. If you go over a certain amount of site coverage, you have to go to the ZBA to get that dimensional area variance. But if we talk somebody into putting permeable paving or permeable asphalt instead of asphalt, or concrete, that doesn't count. So our code says whether it's site coverage, whether it's permeable or not. So it's really hard to talk people into putting permeable pavement down in that condition. I mean, we can try it in some other ways, in other wetland pieces, but outdoor tables. Here's one that just came up, that places like delis, Bluebird ice cream place, places that are to-go places, if they don't have, the way we have always done outdoor seating, outdoor tables at restaurants is, if you can have 20 tables inside, you can take 5 of those during the summer and move them outside. But we don't say, if you're just a takeout place, we don't have any provision for picnic tables, little tables outside, and especially during the pandemic, this is really an important thing. How do you get that, into the town code? That doesn't take, by the way, a comprehensive plan, I don't think, to do, but it's some of the ideas of when you start hearing from people who say they want a livable town, they want a social town, they want a thriving commercial center, then you have to think about, well, does that include outdoor tables? Well, if so, it's got to be, in the parking lot of something. It has to be allowed under the code, and right now it's not. And I think the other this is one of the things that I think some of you've already talked a little bit about, working from home. We have seen recently at the planning board many requests for, I want to enlarge my garage, I want to put a second story on my garage, I want to put an office in, I want to put an outbuilding in where I can have an office. I want to convert my garage to an office. Now, right now, when 3 months ago, when nobody was visiting these offices, it didn't matter if you were an architect or an accountant or something, everything was being done remote. But when people in the future want to do this, are there things that could come up that are noise or traffic or lighting or parking or other issues? And again, we see a lot of these. If it's a residential, we tend to see it only if it's wetlands, because we have the ability to build accessory buildings on a lot in the town. So unless it's a wetland, we don't see it. But this might be something that, working from home, there are not necessarily site plan issues, but nuisance issues that come up. So I'm going to talk about also the noise ordinance. There is a tremendous amount of confusion about whether the limits on noise on Sundays, whether that applies only to commercial people or does that apply to homeowners too. So I'm not gonna say what I think. 4 minutes left. Yes, I'm almost done. Another thing that might go into consideration is an odor ordinance. And I'm thinking about that especially as some of the marijuana laws perhaps come into effect. I don't know that there's going to be processing in Lewisboro that we have the right things, but if, somebody might want to have a nuisance odor ordinance, which by the way, would probably carry over for wood boilers and burn piles and other things as well. So, so I think I've rambled on enough, but to give you an idea of what the planning board does in real life as we try to look at the code and to show you how important the code really is. I have a couple more examples, but we've taken up any question time that you want. So please, if you have questions, feel free to ask away.
Well, I want to make sure we have our 15 minutes for action items at the end. So we have 3 minutes for questions now. But I'm sure if we think of questions, and I know, in working through the RFP and starting to work with a consultant on the planning process, that there will be questions about the zoning code, and planning board's experience in implementing the code will be really important. So we'll keep a running list of questions open if it's okay with you, and,
Of course.
keep the dialogue going.
We're not going anywhere.
All right. So the other thing I was going to make a couple of comments on the RFP, but I think perhaps it's better if we're going to bring it up at the planning board meeting, and I think it would probably be better to get a planning board view than my view. So that's something else to be said. Okay.
That sounds good.
Although maybe Charlene, if you could send me maybe a Word doc and I could do some redlining on it in case, would that be possible? Okay, no questions. So, well, you know where to find us.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
And I guess my just final takeaway is, look, this is really an long overdue task, really important in terms of the future of the town. I think now is a really an appropriate time to do it, because so many things are like Jan just said. Even the issue of remote work, and and who's to say where the town's going to be 5 or 10 or 15 years now? Things are changing so rapidly, but it really is time. And the piece that we were kind of stressing at the beginning is the comp plan is critical, but it needs to be linked to really a comprehensive kind of overhaul of the town code. The town code is outdated in many instances. There are just technical fixes that need to be made. And this is not, to Jane and Dan, this is not a criticism. Believe me, you guys are on the front line. But if we can get away from the town board having to react to changing dynamics and changing situations, and coming up with code changes, not on an ad hoc basis, that suggests that they're just coming out of the blue and for no reason. But we're getting, as a planning board, we're getting this referral on these piecemeal changes. And I just think a more holistic look at the town as a whole through the comp plan, and then at the code, as a whole, is just really necessary, and really be very, very beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, and I think emphasizing that in the RFP will be one of the things that the planning board would encourage addition to. So it's not done when you get the comp plan, but I think that I would anticipate that the planning board would echo Judd's sentiments here, that would say it's not over until the at least considerations or recommendations for changes to the town code are part of the plan. Okay,
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Debbie. Really appreciate your time.
Okay.
okay.
If you
Night,
want to
night, everybody.
stick around, you're welcome. If you would like to sign off, no problem. I actually have to call the meeting officially to order now, to formalize that. And I need to move to approve the minutes from our June 1st meeting and our June 3rd meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great.
Katie, they actually have to be two separate votes.
Oh, okay. So first for June 1st, all in favor?
Can I have a motion and a second and then an all in favor?
Yes.
I move.
Can I second?
You sure can.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. June 3rd? I move.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Favor.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Okay, so action items. I'm gonna skip around just in the interest of time. So what I really want to just make sure is that we have the survey distributed, the paper surveys distributed everywhere they need to be. Can everybody see the screen with the survey to-dos? Okay, awesome. So Lewisboro Library is done. So in terms of the locations that don't have them yet, are we okay? Can we commit to getting them by the end of this weekend? So by end of day Sunday, like for example, Larry, South Salem Post Office by end of day Sunday. Is that
Yeah, I
good?
think there's only a couple. I think it's the South Salem and Walkabout post offices.
Yeah, so Larry, those are your two.
Yes.
So, and then John, can you get it to the Vista Post Office by the end of day Sunday as well?
Yeah, I'll have to pick up some more from Kirsten though.
Okay, great.
We can work on that. And how many you would like at each location?
How many have we done for the others?
Oh, I picked up, I think 15 of each. Or 30, yeah, 30 of each. And I picked it up from the post office today, so I'll drop them off to you, Kristen, either tomorrow or Thursday.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we can do 30 to start, that would be great. And then once you drop it at the location, if you can kind of check in on your spot every couple weeks and make sure there's still surveys available, and then pick up the ones that have been filled out and get them to Kirsten.
So John and Larry, I'll let you know when those copies are ready. And
So
I'll let you know the rest.
let me understand that we're putting two envelopes, one for the unfilled out ones and then one to put them in when they're done. Okay.
And Kirsten will have those ready for you. Like when she gives them to you, she'll have the two envelopes and they'll have labels on them that say blank surveys, completed surveys. Thank you for organizing that, Kirsten.
Yeah. Oh, do you want to share the picture from the library?
Sure.
How helpful they were.
Yeah. Oh, well, I don't have it handy. Do you?
Let me
See if
see.
you can find it. And then Jane, you're gonna get them somewhere in the townhouse where they'll be visible for the public?
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's more efficient than Kirsten getting them. Like, is it, I'm happy to do it, but is that just putting me kind of in a middle position of an inter-office? Like, could Janet just give them to you, Kirsten?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Katie, was there a specific reason why did you want me as a point person at the townhouse?
No, I just wanted to make sure that they got there, that
Yes.
there are two envelopes there that one for blank and one for filled out.
I am under the impression that, Kirsten, you interact with the clerk's office with some relative frequency, right?
Just their mailbox. I
Okay.
haven't put in the building in 16.
Right. Right. But the mailbox, like in terms of like if somebody fills out a survey and drops it off, Janet can get it to you pretty quickly. And yeah, I'll just muddle it.
Well, but is the townhouse open to the public right now? It's not. So we said on our flyer that surveys would be available at the townhouse. So can we have them like on the door or something? You know, like the envelope that has the blank surveys, that one envelope for blank, one envelope for filled out.
So people can just pick them up, you mean?
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's nothing protected from the weather, though.
Why don't you just send them over to the library right next door?
They are at the library
I'm
already.
just saying, townhouse and library are side by side, so.
Yeah.
They are at the library. Maybe we should just remove the townhouse from the flyer.
I wonder if we'll be open pretty soon and you could just leave it and
That's what I was wondering. Are we having our next meeting live?
that's
it's
the
gonna be
word on, that's the
library.
word on the street. Yeah.
All right, so let's take that offline. I can talk with Jane, but I just want to make sure that if we're telling the public, hey, you can pick up a survey at the townhouse, that there's somewhere they can actually do that.
Yeah, it's like not the best case scenario in hindsight, but you know, they can always call when they get to the back door or they can knock. Yeah.
Then if the library's 3 steps away, maybe rather
Okay.
than even, you
So
know.
let's take that
So,
offline.
yeah.
We'll figure it out. They are currently at the library. The library has a table where you can fill them out and a beautiful drop box where you can put them when you're done. It's very cool.
Katie, can I see your screen on that?
Yeah, go for it.
We have them at Onatro.
Yes, Park and Rec has them, as does the senior
All right, good.
coordinator, Pam Veith.
There you go.
Lovely.
Thank you
So
to the
you're welcome.
library.
Thank you, library.
Okay, and then Cross River post office is done, and I need somebody to volunteer to check in at the Golden's Bridge post office in a couple weeks to make sure that they're not out of surveys. Does anybody pass through Golden's Bridge with any frequency? All right, we'll figure that out later as well. Okay. So I'll check in with everybody about that, but the goal is that if we can have the surveys available everywhere we said they were going to be available by the end of this week, by end of day Sunday, then we will be up and running. And Larry, do you want to give a quick 60-second or less update on how the survey is going so far?
Yeah, sure. Well, not counting any of the surveys that may have been completed on paper, while we were on the meeting, I just checked, and the survey monkey, we have 191 surveys in already, which is an increase even from earlier today. So with based on the households or the population work, we're quickly approaching what I think would be a good statistical sampling. So we're in good shape, but it would be great to continue getting in surveys and get more responses, of course.
Awesome. That's so great.
By the way, in terms of non-paper surveys, somebody suggested to me to reach out to the PTAs in town as a way to get it out to do online.
The PTA?
Yeah, every school has a PTA.
Just to have them distribute a link to the survey through a listserv?
Right, just to get the word out. It'd probably be an easy thing to do if we could get the presidents of each of the PTAs. I don't know, do we, if we have a contact at the school board, that would get fairly, I mean, most people in town have kids, so.
Does anybody have a contact there?
I mean, I have a bunch of I have contact names and numbers, but I do know that the Increase Miller PTO is very particular about what they share. And that's not a no. I'm not even, I wouldn't even have that, but I mean, I'm happy to pass along contact information. It might be helpful for somebody from the steering committee to do the actual reach out.
Sure, I can take the lead on that.
Oh, great. I can get you names, either of somebody on the school board or the presidents of the PTOs and contact information.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
John, do you want to give us a 1 or 2 minute, well, what's the deal with the grant? Maybe that might take us to 9.
It's not an easy process, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
I did not get access until June 11th. Tony Concalves gave me, well, initially got me to sign in, but I could sign in, but I couldn't do anything. So I finally got access where I could actually go look at what's available, and it's a hierarchical system. So there's about 4 pages of statewide grants. And I would tell you that none of them applied to comprehensive plans. But then buried in there are the regional grants. So then you have to go down to your region. We're the Mid-Hudson Valley region, and there's a 300 and some odd page document that lists all the grants available and all the criteria and so on and so on. So I've been through that, and I found one that we could probably apply for. The next step is I have to go another step and get registered. And I'm working on that. I think it's a different login than the one I had to get to that point. So we have probably only 5 weeks before the deadline. So I think my take is this is probably something that ought to be in the RFP for the consultant to do, because these applications are quite lengthy. So I'm not sure what the odds are of getting one in this year. They're probably not great. But I'm working through the process so far.
Is there anything that other committee members can do to help you?
Well, I haven't even gotten to the application process yet. That's my next step.
Okay.
And I have to get a different sign in to get to that.
Yeah. So keep us posted. Our next meeting isn't going to be until July 13th because we're down to twice a month, and I figured the week of July 6th with the holiday wasn't a good idea. So communication over email is going to be really important between now and then. But John, if you need any help, if you want to pull in or delegate in any way, we'll do it over email and we'll give it our best shot. If we end up getting something in, awesome. And if we can't make the deadline, I think that's perfectly understandable as well.
Yeah, I'll send out the text from the one I found. I can cut and paste it as I think the best I can do.
Okay. Yeah, just keep us all in the loop.
Most of the grants are very specific. A lot of them have to do with job growth and those kinds of things, or very specific environmental things.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Jan again. Sorry to interrupt, but I mean, I will say that when I tried unsuccessfully for a grant, I was able to sort of ghostwrite for Jane, who did some of it. But I was wondering if that, in the interest of time, because I think this is a July 30th deadline, whether, I was going to suggest that perhaps Jane could be the official submitter again, and you just sort of work ghostwrite for her.
Yeah, I have to go through the process though to find out what I need to submit. It's, I mean, if you've already done it, that would help because I asked Tony if he had anybody who'd done one and he said no, so.
I mean, we did one and I'm happy to be helpful in any way, but I would need to like direction and delegation, like Katie pointed out. I mean, Jan really did a lot of the process. And so we're coming up on the deadline. I'm out of town from July 5th to July 11th, which doesn't mean I'm unreachable.
Yeah, I'm
And
kind
so,
of gone those same times, so.
yeah, but I'm happy to work with you, John.
I
On,
think
yeah.
once I get into the, I guess they have a wizard to apply, but I think my
Yes.
guess is a lot of what we need might be in the RFP.
Yes, I don't know because the information is going to be so different from the culvert one that we applied for. Like Jan, you really had to gather a lot of information and some from Connecticut and here and there and everywhere. So it really depends on the questions of the grant. But I've been pretty successful in getting them in. It's just a matter of Jan's strength of planning ahead came in really handy. I can get work done, but
Yeah,
deadlines are helpful.
we're a little late to the game on this one, but.
Yeah, and we knew when we started that it was a really tight deadline in the first place, and we really wanted to sort of just take a peek at what it was even asking for and how it would work before we got board members involved with any of the logistics. So I think we'll just go from here and John will give an update in terms of what.
And you have to look through the criteria because I found another one that seemed to apply until I read the criteria, and then it was basically, you had to be a poor town to apply, so.
Well, I mean, we it's in terms of like, yeah, well.
Okay, well,
Let's say, we were able, sorry, Katie, we were able to, Jan and I were able to work it out that we were able to sign into the same application. So that was pretty helpful.
Yeah, did you go through the Mid Hudson one or at the higher? Yeah, all right.
Yeah, the Red Sea, I know exactly the one you're, yeah.
Yeah, it was the consolidated funding application, you know, and that whole grant application program. If I can help, I will, but I really can't promise to get involved in another grant at this point.
Yeah.
totally understandable, and we'll take it offline and see how far we can get and go from there.
Everything else will be ready for next year.
Yep, exactly. We'll still be in this process next year. So, and there's a different grant that is due in September. So it's not like this is our only opportunity. We will continue to keep our eyes on what's available and keep trying.
Sure.
Okay, so again, next meeting, July 13th. Email communication in between. Thank you to everybody here for all the work that you've been putting in and for your time. I'm really, really excited that we're getting great responses on our survey, and the RFP looks wonderful, and that's getting circulated around to all the right people, and we'll definitely touch on that at our next meeting. So thank you again to everybody. With that, I would like to adjourn the meeting. I move to adjourn the meeting. Can I get a second?
I'd second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks so much, Katie.